Everybody's got it. It's going around. It's like a bad cold. So if we haven't, you know what? Let me get to Marlene, and then we'll take care of all that next meeting. I promise.
Sure.
So the agenda initially had the Garvin Point press conference as the first thing on the item, but Graham's arranged for Dave Murphy to join us tonight. So rather than keep Dave waiting, we're going to open with him. So Dave and Graham, I will send it to you.
Okay, yeah, let me give you a little introduction.
Give us some background.
Okay, so for those of you who are familiar with the 2016 Madison Resiliency Plan, the author of that plan was David Murphy, and where we left off recently, we were looking to retain someone, specifically David, to update that plan, and we had a certain amount of funds set aside. I think we were talking like $10,000. Now, as everyone probably knows, things have changed, and there's an opportunity to get more money than that. So we might want to revisit, what that scope of work would be. And coincidentally, Dave, who was with Maloma Broom at the time, which became SLR, now Dave is on his own, and he can tell us what he's actually doing for his day job now. But he's deemed worthy to come in and maybe discuss what he knows. He's got a big context. And by way of introduction, he also has been very involved in almost every municipal plan in the state of Connecticut, the vast majority of the plans, I should say. And he's also at the state level. So I think he has a great context of what's going on in Connecticut and would be invaluable helping us with that. So with that, by way of introduction, I promise I'd get him out of here in half an hour. So with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Dave.
Thanks, everyone. And I assume you can hear me okay. I know you can see me. Yeah. So I think actually most of you probably remember me most recently from if you joined the workshops as part of Resilient Connecticut. The SLR was the consultant working for Circa for Resilient Connecticut. So we had a series of workshops in January and May, I think. And a few of you were in the workshop that was more geared towards the Scrog towns. So that's where you saw me most recently. And it's true that I left SLR in August, so just last month. And I have two things going on. One is I'm working for Circa directly to finish the Resilient Connecticut project and help them get started with the next one. That's kind of a temporary job that'll run through sometime in 2022. It's funded for a short amount of time. And then at the same time, I've got my own practice launched. Importantly, Circa does not prohibit me from doing that, since it started before the Circa job. It all sort of happened at the same time, but it did happen before the Circa job. So I've got both those things going on. But so either way, I'll be able to work with all of you going forward. One is with Resilient Connecticut. We still will be working with the Fairfield County and New Haven County towns for the next few months as we wrap up the project. And I expect there'll be another webinar or workshop that you'll all be invited to as part of that Circa team project. And then if you decide to at some point work on an update to your local plan, which I can't believe it's been 5 years, that can also happen. I can help you out with that. Or if you're more comfortable working with a larger firm, I can link you up with a firm that might be well suited for that. Well, back a few months ago, when we were batting around ideas, Dave Anderson and me, about how to update that plan, we were focusing on back in 2016, we didn't have the official state projections for sea level rise. We knew what they were going to be, but they weren't in statute yet. So we could go back and we could update that plan using the projections that we're required to use by state law at this point. Interestingly, I was on a call with Circa a couple of days ago, and it's already time for them to start working on an update. I can't believe that much time has also passed. So there's a couple different things we can do to update the plan. We can look at the current state projections that we're required to use. We could also look at what's changed in the past few years locally, projects that you've completed or things that no longer may be priorities. I know 5 years ago, when Mike Ott was there, he really wanted to see a restoration of the dune adjacent to the surf club. That may or may not be a priority anymore. So we can take a look and see if priorities have changed. And also in the last couple of months, there's been a few storms of note. they weren't terrible coastal events. We dodged a bullet, but they were some good wake up calls anyway. So we could take a look at what the local impacts might have been, or what people were expecting. So there's a lot of different ways we can recast the plan if you decide to update it. And I think if you're working with the budget number that we had been working on a few months ago, 10,000, it was really limited to an update with some additional engagement. We had talked about doing an as story map. But if you have additional funding, you can probably use it to do some additional things with the plan update. So I've been rambling for a few minutes, so why don't I open it to questions and comments?
So is this, I guess the answer, I guess we need to regroup and think in terms of what Graham and you have just said about what is the scope of what we're talking about now. There's a potential, as you described, and we're going to talk about it later in the agenda for tonight's meeting. There's a potential for some funding that, 2 or 3 months ago we didn't realize might be available, and now it seems like it might be. And in that context, what are the things that we ought to be thinking about that we, aside from just updating the plan on a relatively limited scale, what should we be thinking about? Maybe a little more expanded than that. So do you have any thoughts on since you're familiar with the prior plan, what would be areas that we should be focusing on that we might not have thought of before, or not been able to think of before, or do something about, but now address based on being able to do more than we thought we were, sort of more than we were targeting?
I don't think that the answer, I think, is to really focus more on. So one of the ways that I'll get to the answer in a second, but back at Mylone McBroom, our coastal resilience plans tended to be very applied and not very theoretical. And what that means is we would leave every plan with a couple different concept designs that could be used to pursue grants. So, for example, with West Haven, we had a concept design for a tide gate replacement, and it got somehow into the hands of the bond commission, and West Haven got $4 million suddenly to do tide gate replacements. So I think we had a couple of concept designs that tacked onto the end of that plan. And my dream for Madison would be to maybe expand on that. So there's a couple of the things that you would be left with that are you could touch, they're tangible, and you could use to pursue grants. So you might want to think about what that would be. So there already was a concept in there for the Surf Club Dune. There was something in there for the Middle Beach Road revetment, I believe. And I think there was a lot of attention spent on the Green Hill Road issues, which may be addressed or maybe not as high on the priority list anymore. So you might want to think about what your ideas are for addressing maybe a road elevation. We didn't look at any road elevations in detail. Maybe some sort of living shoreline approach somewhere. So there's other things that we could kind of spend more time on that we didn't. At the time, it was very staff driven. We were working with Mike Ott. Those were his ideas for what to spend time on with concepts. But I think there's opportunities to kind of advance some other concepts forward as part of a planning grant.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, if I can interject. Yeah, so the list we've been working on are all kind of like typical solving existing problems, but I'd like to maybe look, beyond what, 20 years out, what are the problems going to be? Because, the obvious fixed solutions are, they would write grants, but they're not really looking beyond, what happens 20 years for the long range plan. Because Madison's, we're a pretty well run town. The roads are relatively elevated with the exception of like 2 or 3 streets. But, there are low lying areas that could be subject to, inundation. So, what would we do about some of those areas, in the next 20 years?
Yeah.
So I'll mention something. Walter, go ahead. Sorry.
Hank, when we had talked, I think with Dave Murphy and with Graham and with Dave Anderson, one of the things we were looking at, I think the firm SLR, and I always mix up the way they say the other name, but anyway, M&M. We talked about, they had a package, Dave Murphy, at the back of some kind of a communication package or way to tell a story. We had talked about that, and then I had asked Graham to look at whether we could look a little bit more away from the coast, more on the inland wetland side, to look at some of that. And the reason was this commission, as we've looked at it, even though it has the word coastal as the first word, we've been really looking at this as having what are the town-wide concerns where you might have wetlands or flooding or other things. And I think what you had presented to us is really a choice. We could hold off on that storyboard kind of approach, but you could use the funds to take a look at this other sort of I don't know whether I'm describing it right, Dave Murphy, but I think it was inland wetlands. I think that's what I was asking you to look at.
Yeah, that's my recollection, and I wasn't sure. I couldn't remember where we were at, which is why I didn't raise the topic. So I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, we hadn't really decided. I think that was we'd gotten partway there, and of course, the beauty of COVID is it's postponed everything, if there's any beauty at all. So when we come back to that, I think for us to think about is, and you'd help tee that up, is okay, there was this, if you wanted something on the inland, we weren't going to be able to do the other, but maybe now we have some extra funding. And these weren't super expensive. I mean, expensive is the wrong word. Relatively small numbers with regard to doing something on the inland wetlands versus what's the best way of phrasing that? Storyboard? What would you call it?
It was a story map. The ArcGIS story map. That was a way to do outreach in the world of COVID. And honestly, right, you're going to see every project going forward that you ever do will have a story map. They're just fundamental. But that would be for like a larger complex project, not necessarily an update.
Yep. Okay. So that's just something that we could keep as we think about this. And I wasn't sure we had Dave Murphy. Give us just one more. What we talked about inland wetlands. What would you have been doing? What would you have done in that area, if anything, at this?
Yeah, I think my recollection was we were going to use just a small portion of that $10,000 would be used for that. So maybe a couple thousand, and it was going to be limited to a little bit of site recon. I was going to send the tidal wetland scientists out to take a look at different areas of interest, and we would try to incorporate their findings into sort of how to, if there was a way to link restoration or existing conditions to resilience.
Right, and I think Rob's been on the Wetlands Agency for a long time, so we were just sort of pushing along on this. And I think one of the harder things to come to grips with is the intersection of tidal wetlands and inland wetlands, and sometimes who's in charge and what the rules are. And that's not to be solved today, but I think it's an important one as well.
Right. Yeah. I think, resilience needs to have I've always said resilience is more than coastal. People link the two words together. So I think that taking a more town-wide approach is not a bad idea. I don't know. I don't really recall how your committee is set up. Is the word coastal in the committee name, or is it resilience only?
It's coastal resiliency. So we're multi-religion.
And certainly we've seen these past couple storms, the heavy rainfall amounts in the non-coastal areas are what were really the problem. So resilience is everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, that's something for us to consider as we move along with discussing with you. And it isn't that, it wouldn't take that much more funding to do both of those things. We want the story map and do something on that. Okay. Thank you.
What other questions do we have?
I just had a quick question. Do we need some of this potential short-term funding to provide technical data for a grant application for larger projects?
I think actually the town is going to hire a grant writer specifically looking at these projects and all their projects. So they're retaining a firm to assist them with grant writing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Outside of our potential budgets.
Got it.
Right.
So once the projects are identified, they could help support on that end.
Right, on the grant writing stuff, yeah. Exactly.
Got it. Okay, cool.
My impression from Peggy was that a fair amount of the money, or not, I don't know what the fair amount even means,
The political term.
Of what money may be available would be helpful in doing the grant writing piece. So yeah, some whatever funding they're talking about is I think in her approach is going to be some of that grant writing to the state and for other things coming. So
Got it.
it's not just for we're going to start digging over here or moving sand over there. It's going to be, let's go to the state and see what other funding they have. I think the context is the infrastructure bill in Washington and how that all trickles down to states and how that can be applied to municipalities and to smaller locations than just a state, right? How it's employed. What else do we have?
I have one other thing for you guys just to think about. I think I don't remember who it was, but one of you emailed another one of you about the hazard mitigation plan. And just in case you didn't know this, I believe SCROG is going to begin the update of the hazard mitigation plan in early 2022. So 4 or 5 months from now, you'll want to get plugged into that. It's typically staff driven, and I don't know which staff person in Madison will be charged with it, but you'll probably want to follow the procedure a little bit more closely now that you exist as a group.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and
So
just a way of background. So the town has hired a new planner. I don't know if it's official yet, but that person's going to help hire an environmental planner that's going to be our liaison. So in lieu of Dave, we're going to have Dave Anderson. We're going to have a not dedicated person, but a primary point of contact with the staff.
Okay,
So
good.
So just another question for David. I don't know if you even know the answer to this, but the state passed that legislation where towns are allowed to create this fund. I know Branford, Jim Finch was a big advocate of that. Do you know how the specifics of how that works in other communities, or I don't know how much you know about that particular program?
Yeah, I know that they intend for it to work similar. They use Branford as a model, so they're hoping to just see that happen again. I don't know that. I don't think anybody else has done it yet, if that's the question you're asking. Yeah, so we still just have Branford to look to.
Well, hopefully tonight, after this, there's a Board of Finance meeting, and they're going to hopefully vote on moving that forward. So they're going to fund it to $500,000 tonight. So hopefully we'll be the second town.
Good.
So I'm going to ask just sort of a general question that I know nothing. I don't know the source of this at all, but I've been hearing or reading, probably a little bit of both, about the idea of, probably hearing more than reading, about the idea that somebody came up with an assessment that said, compared to sea level rise or water rise, mega storms or big storms, or the frequency of storms from a beach erosion and damage to the shoreline perspective is much greater than the sea rise. Have you seen anything? Do you have any thoughts on that? Maybe, it's like, yeah, you can spend time on the sea level rise, but what you really should be protecting yourself against is the severity of the storms and the damage that a storm or two storms can do in a year versus what you might do to mitigate the slow rise of the coast, of the water along the coast.
Yeah, I mean, my opinion is it's the two working together that really are the problems. The severe storms are always going to be with us, and we're going to constantly be dealing with those. If I could just relate a quick story. So my resilience story is that we had a family cottage in Wellfleet on Cape Cod that my grandfather built in the 50s, and we lost it in 2013. And of course, my family thought, well, David's perfect. We'll just put him in charge of demolishing it because it fits with his job. So I had to go out there and haul furniture out of it as it was dangling over the cliff, and then hire a contractor to demolish it before it fell, because you can't let something fall to the beach in Wellfleet, or else then you're in trouble with the conservation committee, commission. But the point of the story is that we look back to see, what really was the event that triggered that. Because remember, 2013 was after Sandy, but Sandy wasn't really that big of a deal in Massachusetts. So in looking at it further, there was there was a period of time in 2009, 2010 that we lost a lot of the beach and a lot of the lower part of the bluff because the storms were higher temporarily. We didn't know it at the time, but in looking back, there was a temporary rise in sea level in 2009, 2010. You can read about it. There's been a lot of journal articles about it that really allowed the storms to just reach a little bit further over that 2-year period. And we lost a lot of the protection that we had in place over the years. And so over the course of 2009, 2010, when there was a run-of-the-mill nor'easter or some of the more distant hurricanes, the surf was covering the entire beach and just really eating away at what a lot of the grass that had been in place. And that set up for, the next couple of years, the storms, there was nothing to protect us from them, and we lost the rest of the land. So the point of that is that temporary rise in sea level, even though it was very, very small, a matter of centimeters, it allowed the lateral distance for the storms that can reach to really have more of an impact. I think that's a good example of what will be happening going forward. If we have a little bit of sea level rise that sort of jumps in little bits like that, the next few storms are going to reach further across the beach, erode more of the bluff, and really step up the situation for run-of-the-mill storms to take more land. I'll forward you guys the link if I can find it about that 2-year temporary rise. It really was a problem in Maine. I don't know if any of you ever go on holiday in coastal Maine, but it was a big problem there as well. So I think it's the two acting together that really are sort of the menace going forward.
Yeah, thank you.
It sounds like a good argument or setup for beach restoration or dune and sand restoration.
Absolutely. I really think that that's a great point. And a lot of people say beach nourishment is just a waste because it just washes away. But when you don't have it there, the next storm you have nothing to stop it. And that's exactly what happened with our cottage. We always knew in the end, look, my grandfather said when he was still alive in the 70s, it's going to be your problem to deal with someday. It's just sand, there's no bedrock. So we knew it was coming. We just didn't know it was coming so quickly because of those 2 years where the storms just couldn't be stopped. There was no beach left.
No, that's good. Thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Well, we have talked about that in our own local plan as some beach restoration also. So maybe that's another category to put in the plan.
Mm-hmm.
What else do we have for Dave? If nothing else, you may be off the hook.
Oh, wait, I was talking on mute.
Oh, sorry.
You talked about the Circa's update of their plan. Does that plan include any increase in their original prediction? What was it, 30 by 2050, or is there any forecast 50 for an increase?
I think it's 50 by 250.
Yeah,
50 centimeters by 2050.
Right. So I expect there'll be some moderate nominal increase just because that's the way things tend to go. Or they'll look out further. Maybe what they'll do is rather than changing the number for the year 2050, they'll tie it to 2060 or some other point in time.
Joe Mako here.
Yeah.
Question. This revision of the plan we were originally talking about, and then Walter talked about including inland wetlands. Is there any reason we can't do this coastal and then the second part, or part A and part B, be inland flooding as opposed to trying to bring it all into one? And I know Circa's kind of into everything from high winds and high temperatures. So this is all expanding as we speak. So my question is, though, if we're revising a coastal plan, should we stay with that revision and then add on, or do we have to wait and redo the whole thing?
So Joe, let me just say, because this isn't a new discussion for us. I brought it up. It's hard to think about this because we don't meet because of COVID on a regular basis. So we brought this up about 6 months ago and had the same discussion. I think what we were looking at then, and I think you make a fair point, we could do it separately. What we're really looking at is resilience as being a common word. And I know we've tried to make it clear to that in our descriptions of what this commission does, it's just not the coast, it's the town. And that's kind of where we were. And what I was looking for is if you had a plan that we've already spent some time on, and it was going to cost us $8,000 to update it, and we could take another $2, just that much, to make sure we'd gone a little further, so that those folks who didn't live on the coast would see that this commission and the town were interested in their areas as well. And I want to say, oh, we'll get to you later. It was really, if we could grab that now. And I'm particularly concerned about the intersection of inland and tidal, which are very close in some places. So that was my thought. So, I mean, others may think differently, but we did talk about it a few months ago, and we never got to a final point. But I would if we could add it for, say, a fifth of the cost to update, it would be worth adding something else.
The fact of the matter is, Madison is a coastal town, not the south end of it. The whole town is a coastal town, subject to coastal events. I'd say 99 out of 100 storms that we get flooded by are coastal storms. Either it's a hurricane coming up inland or a northeaster coming up the coast. It's something like that. So I think it all gets tossed into the same barrel, no matter what.
And I would agree, if you're asking my opinion. I mean, we worked at the town of Hampton, New Hampshire last year, and Hampton's a funny town. It's a triangle, and everyone knows Hampton Beach, but the corner of the triangle is way far inland, points towards Nottingham and inland New Hampshire, and we had these ridiculous arguments. People would say, we don't care about the coast. We live in this little corner of Hampton, but it's everyone's shared tax base. It's everyone's shelter, right? Everyone has to go to the same shelter. It's everyone's roads and it's everyone's schools, and so it's great to think about things a little bit more holistically. So I support you guys on that if that's the way you go.
I also think we ought to keep a close eye on the update to the hazard mitigation plan, because that's all hazard mitigation, and we want to be able to dovetail both of these efforts and make sure that we don't duplicate effort, and that we get the most thorough and comprehensive review done.
And Rob, who's has responsibility for the hazard mitigation plan?
That's a fine question. I'm not certain. And I think that Dave, when he mentioned the fact that it was going to be going out for an update, indicated that he wasn't certain who would be handling it at the town level. So I think that's something that we ought to,
Yes. Okay.
find out about and make sure that we're tied in with that effort, so that we can get the most bang for our buck in all of these planning efforts.
And I guess one question is, how is that funded?
The town has an emergency response committee, don't they? Dave, do you know?
Well,
or Hank, do you know?
If I could just really quickly, the hazard mitigation plan is funded by a FEMA grant. So FEMA requires the plans, and then FEMA pays for them as well. So
okay,
that's and the COG holds the funding for the plan, and then they coordinate it.
okay. So other than management, it's covered.
Is part of that hazard mitigation to keep your floodplain ordinance up to date, and those types of, having a floodplain manager and administrating the firm?
That's typically addressed, right?
Okay, what else do we have? All right, well, Dave, if there's nothing else, I appreciate your time and look forward to working with you.
All right, thanks, guys. Have a good night.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
So next thing on the agenda is there was a Garvin Point press conference that spoke about the work that the town is going to do down there at Garvin Point, and it was an interesting event. Peggy was there and various different officials. So what was interesting is the lieutenant governor of the state was there, Susan Beisowitz. And that was interesting because it's pretty big deal just for Garvin Point. That was a lot of exposure. And Channel 8 was there, and I forget the other, there was another newspaper there or website, I forget the name of it.
Yeah.
Which was it? Do you recall?
I think it was the Source, wasn't it?
I don't know that it was. It was not one that I noticed. I mean, if the source was there, I didn't recognize that. And there were members of the commission that were there. Wayne and Rob was there. I was there. Graham was there. I'm trying to remember if I missed somebody. If you were there and I missed you,
I think Walter was there.
Walter was there. Excuse me.
Yeah, I was using the name Hank McGuire then, but was there.
Yeah. He wanted to. He didn't want
Walter's
to be
wife was there.
noticed.
Yeah, my Liz was there as well. You know what's interesting, Hank? I looked to see whether it got any coverage on the news. I didn't see it. Channel 8 actually run it. You know.
I didn't see a whole lot.
No,
I think it was on Channel 8 because 2 people mentioned that they saw it, which I was surprised.
Okay.
I didn't think anybody watched Channel 8 News anymore, but
I do. So I do. I
my
just
barber-
started when that woman, Ann Nyberg, showed up. I've been there since then.
yeah. My barber
So-
saw it. He said my hair looked good.
Yes, and so the Beach and Rec was there, and you know, so it was interesting.
But no Dick Blumenthal. Dick wasn't there. I was a little disappointed.
No, yeah, we
That was,
didn't.
That's why Susan was there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Susan was there, and she spoke. She spoke for about 5 minutes, and she was very gracious and nice, as you kind of expect. But it was interesting. And then she took some questions. Peggy took some questions. There was, there were some questions asked by the reporters that were there. So it was kind of it was interesting. Graham spoke. I spoke briefly and then had Graham come up and actually finish it all off. But it was to actually answer the questions. But it was good. It was very different. I'd not been to one before, so it was really interesting. And the point of this, my perspective is the fact that we were there and being represented at representatives of the town and being represented in this case by the first selectman, with the lieutenant governor being there to the press, where I thought it was, unlike some of the press we've gotten in the past or some of the exposure we've gotten in the past, this was a very positive and it was just a very positive review or context that the CRC was involved with. So it was all good for us from my perspective.
It was very supportive, I thought.
Very supportive. And she did mention to Susan that they were going to try and get this $500,000 fund, and part of that was to put together grant applications that then they would be coming back to the state for further help in getting some of these projects done. That was after I had stepped forward, and they said, "What do you have to say?" And I said, "Well, this is, Garvin Point is a great example of the work that we helped the town with, and met with the engineers and talked to them about what the approaches could be, and listened to what they were planning, and here we are." And then I said, "And this is only the beginning. We have a list of other things to do." And I heard somebody behind me. It might have been Susan Beisowitz. It wasn't Peggy, because the question, what I heard behind me was, "You have a list?" I sort of like, okay. Yes, we do. And so that's when Peggy said yes, and we're going to be coming back to the state with this fund, part of this fund, to ask for additional help. So I thought that was pretty interesting. But it was good. It was a very good experience, and we were well represented by Peggy, and also well represented by the members of the commission that were able to be there. So any other thoughts or comments on the Garvin Point press conference? Let's see here. Okay, so the next thing on the agenda is the status of the Coastal Resilience Fund and the project list. So Graham mentioned earlier that the Board of Selectmen or Board of Finance, excuse me, are actually meeting right now, and on the agenda tonight, among all the other things that they're going to talk about, is this $500,000 fund that Peggy mentioned, and that she spoke about it at the press conference, which I mentioned. And so we're going to see what they say about it. It was, Graham, correct me if I'm wrong, the process here is the Board of Selectmen have already approved this. Which goes first, the Board of Selectmen or the Board of Finance?
Yeah, the selectmen, they made the recommendation unanimously.
Yes, okay.
So they have
Right,
to
so
go down the actual, the 500 grand is approved by the Board of Finance, so.
Okay, yeah, right. So this
Is this a one-time seed, or is it going to be an annual amount put into the budget?
I don't know if they know that the first tranche, I love using that word, is 500. So they have money, you know, I think they have like an unfunded balance of like $8 or $9 million. So it's sitting there already nothing. And you know, this legislation allows you to get higher rates of, you know, I don't think we're going to get a Yale's, you know, fund, but we'll get a better rate of return than the 1/3% we get now.
So it sounds like a one-time deal, and if we get it rolling and keep moving, it's something we can fund on an annual basis
Right.
through the town budget.
Yeah, I haven't heard Peggy say annually. I just heard her say, let's see if we can get this 500,000 and, you know, go from there, basically.
Like
Yep,
seed
get your foot in the door. Yep.
Yeah,
I think she's thinking like shovel-ready projects, do some engineering and planning so we can get some projects. Then when and if some of this infrastructure money comes through, we'll be closer, you know, to, yeah.
Right, I think the shovel-ready thing keeps coming up because I think a lot of people were sort of surprised at the last round of federal infrastructure funding because everything had to be, you had a plan on the shelf that was shovel-ready, the money just came pouring in. And I think that there's some sensitivity about that now to get yourself prepared.
right.
Well, that's a good point, because I know the infrastructure money, we're doing a lot of railroad work, and I know there's a ton of money is going to go towards, you know, bringing our rail back into usable condition and improved condition, and people are jumping right and left to get their claws into that funding.
Right. So that's kind of where we're at. So it's actually, it's all good. From our perspective, it gives us a boost, and you know, says, okay, we're in the game now and we can actually get something done. So it's good. And by the way, I'll just make this comment. The Garvin Point, and then just in general, Peggy's been very supportive of the commission. So we've got that, you know, we've got that representation as very supportive to what we want, what we'd like to be able to do, what the town would like to do, and as the first selectman, she's been very supportive. So it's all good. So let's see here, nothing more on that. Okay, well, the next thing on this will be quick, because the next thing on the agenda was to review the meeting with the Beach and Rec. And the Beach and Rec had a meeting, and Graham and I sat on the meeting for about, I don't know, 50 minutes, an hour. And then we decided that, I think Graham hung on longer than I did. We decided that maybe they weren't going to get to us, and we had a bigger agenda than we thought. So I begged off. And Graham, what happened? You actually heard from them or hung on longer than I did.
They apologized. They ran. They got, you know, an hour and a half went on. They had a long agenda. Initially, it was I think there was a problem logging in initially. So I don't know if they were gonna put it as in the middle, but by the time we got on, they had moved past us, so. I told them we'd come, I sent them a plan and I said we'd come back at the next meeting. And I reached out to them and, discussed it because in terms of how much involvement they want us on the Garvin Point project, how involved they want us actually involved in that project. They haven't actually retained the engineer to do the engineering yet. So that would be, there's a selection process that's going to have to happen.
Yeah. Well, when we come back, make sure they put us at the top of the agenda.
I'm pretty sure that'll happen. Yes. That's why I'm.
So, okay, so as far as the agenda goes, general discussion, but part of that general discussion, Walter, you wanted to talk about something here tonight?
Yeah, just I've been thinking about, communication, information for folks, and really wanted to go back and think about where we would have started had we been meeting, regularly, in person for a couple of years. Whether we could reach out to existing commissions, and some of you've been around a long time. First would be the Inland Wetlands Agency, just for an example. And what I was looking to do is, I spoke to Kay Aloha, who's the chair of that group now, and Rob, of course, was on that group for many years, about whether there would be a place for us to provide education and information for landowners who own inland wetlands or own land that abuts them, just about how important inland wetlands are and what else they might do. And this is where I'm beyond my expertise, but we'd get some people to give us what could people do in terms of how they care for the land that is already wetland or abuts the wetland. This is not restricting them in ways with things they might plant or how they should treat the area that's within a certain number of feet of the wetlands. I mean, there's rules about what you can do for development and getting permits, but this was just more of a general educational effort that the Coastal Resiliency Commission could take on in other places as well. But we might start with landowners who own wetlands or who abut wetlands, and start with the Inland Wetlands Group and see if we could work with them to come up with some kind of an education. And I'm not sure how it would be delivered yet, but I talked to them and
Carefully,
what's that?
carefully. You want to
What was the
handle
word?
that carefully,
What was the word you used?
carefully.
Well, and yes, everything should be done with care, by the way. So I'll go
No,
with that.
I mean, you could have a blowback similar to what we had with the flood ordinance. I mean, as you know, you mentioned it, inland wetlands is highly, highly restricted and
Yeah.
regulated. And
and
step
I'm
out
not,
of-
so that, and this is good. So you listen, we learned, I think what I was looking for is strictly at this point, I was talking to Kayla about education and information. No rules, no restrictions. Maybe, if you have it and you want to know what would be nice to plant along that, and that's where I haven't even got to that kind of an idea until you folks thought about it. But I wanted to talk to her just about reaching out to wetland owners and telling them these are important lands that you either own or you abut. Just information. It would be a trial run. We're not proposing any form of, at least at this point, I wasn't thinking of that. And I was really looking at a way this commission could work with a couple of places. And Kealoha said, the best way, and I said, we could just talk offline. It's an agency, and I wasn't going to discuss any substance offline, but she asked if, I would come and maybe Hank and just talk about us looking for a way to help, not telling them what we wanted to do just yet, but just wanting to get to talk with them and see whether they'd be receptive to that. And they work all the time on, as you folks know, who work with on specific projects and specific permits. I'm looking at something which is much more general in nature that we could do from a communication education point of view. And instead of just starting town-wide, we'd actually look at folks who have land that's right next to the wetlands or abuts the wetlands. We might eventually move someday to tidal wetlands. That's a different place, and it's not with this agency. So I don't know what you think about that, but because we don't have to do anything right now, but we could go to one of their meetings in a couple of weeks and talk about whether they're interested in this.
And that there are a lot of very good publications out there. I've been using a publication that the state of Rhode Island put out years ago about management of areas that buffer wetlands in the coast. They have a different, Rhode Island has a different, little bit of a different set of environmental circumstances, but they have some, there are, and the Yukon has been doing a lot of work too. So there's a lot of educational information out there. It's just a matter of how to disseminate it and, you know, get it into the right hands to be used in the right way.
And so, Rob, the getting it into the right hands would be getting it into landowners' hands, or where would you?
That's always one of those concerns, because you're right. The Inland Wetlands Commission is a good place to get all that information to, because they can help structure conditions of approval potentially using that information. And I think they try to do that. But getting it into the hands of property owners, that's another step that can be a little bit difficult, because you can't just really do a mailing to, you know, here, take a look at this. So, you know, I'm not sure.
Or what
You're the communication guy, so.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. It would be up to us, the communication folks, to think about that. And you're right, just a mailing, and just mailings anyway, or emails aren't going to be the thing. This is what I tried to say. This is just a first step. I just wanted to do kind of a meet and greet, you know, hi, we're here, we're looking at this, we're thinking about education, communication, and it wouldn't take more than a few minutes of their agenda just to see what they say back to us. I mean, I've been at this a long time. Lots of commissions could say, we're on our own, get out of here, don't bother us, you know. I mean, that's.
No, but knowing the Inland Wetlands Commission, I think they would say, thanks very much for coming. This is great. We you know, we're interested in what you're doing. We've kind of got our heads down in the trenches going through our permitting agenda.
I listen to them, and they do a whole permitting agenda, and I'm just saying we might come up with them. And what you've just described is some kind of material which we just share with them, and then we could talk to them about whether there's a place to use it. This is early on. I don't want to resolve this today, but I thought this was a first step, and then the next step might be, how do we reach, with the tidal wetlands is a lot for me to learn about. I guess all of that area is governed by DEP for the most part.
Exclusively.
Yeah, and so what we could do with them would be a separate discussion. But I thought I'd start with inland wetlands. I thought I'd also start with the Conservation Commission, but a series of emails and phone calls I've made showing you how good I am at this, I've gotten no response. People are busy. I don't know anybody really on the Conservation Commission. Does anybody know anybody on that group?
Well, when I talked to you, you mentioned who the chairwoman's name.
Yeah, that's what we did. She's the one I've called. Does anybody know Heather Crawford?
I know Heather. I've dealt with her in the past. So.
I've spoken with her a couple of times in the context of being on the zoning commissions and boards. So,
well, let me start. Let me keep looking at with the idea of just maybe Hank and I going to talk to the inland wetlands folks, maybe like in a Zoom like this, just to acquaint them with what we're doing and how we'd like to help them in some ways if we could. Let's try that, and then I'll come back to conservation next.
And also, not only tell them what we're trying to do or thinking or what our goals are, but also listen to them and like what they want to do and what their issues are, and sort of like, okay, we're doing fine or we're not doing fine, and here's where we're having problems. So and the point of my saying this is, I think from a land management, land oversee, town sort of management perspective, a broader picture is, if you're doing all this stuff in a silo, you're probably not going to be as effective as if you understand what the other pieces within the town that are semi or closely focused on the area you are, what they're doing. So it would benefit just not us, but in the long term, get us to a place where we understand what other things are going on and take advantage of that if and when we may someday be able to.
Just
That's why I
just-
think it was great that you went to the Beach and Rec, because that's another group, and the more different organizations and parts of the town government that are aware of what this commission's doing, the better off everybody is.
Yeah, just thinking about the new hire, the environmental planner is probably going to be our liaison and their liaison and the Conservation Commission's liaison as staff. So there's going to be a lot of overlap.
I don't know, Aaron Mannix has been the assistant town planner in Guilford for several years, so she'll be a good person to have on board, and she's a good person to work with.
Right. So they're going to hire, she's going to help hire the environmental planner
Mhm.
person. So yeah, so it's all good.
Yeah, I think as much as we can get in on, if it exists, or maybe we'll help move it along, that the web of associations amongst these groups, if it's funneled through the town planner or funneled through other people, but just the idea that we have some semblance of, we know what they're doing and they know what we're doing, and are there ever commonalities where we can share, if not work together, at least share some things and thinking, and get something done that we may or may not have been able to do in a silo kind of environment. I think that's for the good of the town overall, not necessarily just for this commission. That's for everybody. So I think all this stuff, all this association and communication relative to that is only helpful to the town. And and we may benefit from it one time and somebody else may for another time, but in general, the town will benefit if anything comes of any of it. So I applaud Walter reaching out like that, and I want to go back to the Beach and Rec and continue with the outreach. Anything else on that? Anything else on either Walter's subject of communication relative to what we were discussing, or other subjects? We're in the general discussion segment of the agenda tonight. So all is, whatever you have on your mind now's the time.
I got to jump off and go to the finance meeting so we can make sure we get our funding. So they asked me to join them at 8. So I'm going to jump off, everybody, and we can get some funding. So
Thanks, Graham.
Good job. Thank you.
yeah,
Thank
take
you.
care.
Hey, Hank, the fact that you used one word, association, I was thinking it brought to mind associations. And as everybody knows, there are a lot of associations around town. That may not be a bad idea to compile a list of these, and specifically around the coastal area,
Oh, yeah.
and trying to keep them, because they are, as we all know, can be powerful in themselves. And
Yes, yeah.
sometimes they're butting heads with the town, sometimes they're working with the town. So it may not be a bad idea to at least start compiling a list of the associations around town, around lakes, around inland wetlands, as well as the coastal area.
Absolutely. I mean, they can be a very potent group of influencers, to use a currently popular word, but they can have a lot to say. And I'll say this real quick. One time years ago, when I was on the Zoning Board of Appeals, I made a comment about an association off of Neck Road, something about marching around with placards. When I got home, maybe 2 hours later, I already had 3 messages, and the following day, 2 or 3 more from the association, that association, and they didn't like at all what I was saying about them. And so they pay attention, and they're very they're good people that have their areas, not just their single property, but their areas in mind, and they're dedicated to it, and I think it's great. And so but you are right, they can influence their areas, and they're they're people that ought to know about us and what we're trying to do, and let them know that we're trying to help, not get in the way of what they're doing.
I remember the old days, and a lot of you would remember too, the old Property Owners Association that would either come out for or against the they'd be instrumental in turning down an education budget many times in the past, years ago.
So we ought to add some of the beach associations and other lake associations to our list of people that we want to get to know, and also we want them to know what we're thinking about and what we ought to, and also listen to them and say, okay, what are your thoughts on that?
And
right?
what are your problems and concerns? Because I know a lot of those associations have common issues.
Yes.
And they're trying to work on protecting themselves and becoming more resilient.
Yep. So that's a great thought. Thank you. Really good. What else do we have on general discussion? Any other subjects anybody wants to talk about? Okay, if we're done with this current subject and we have nothing further, then I would we'll adjourn the meeting.
When will our next meeting be?
It'll be regularly scheduled next month. This one was off because of the Zoom problem last week.
Okay, and will the new town planner be hired by then? And should we?
I don't know.
What's that?
I do not know.
I think she's supposed to be coming on this month, but I haven't heard directly. So we could have a meet and greet.
Right. So Joe, I just don't know when her start would be, and up until today's meeting, I didn't even know her name. I didn't even know it was a her. So, if there's nothing else, we'll adjourn.
Okay, thanks, Hank.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right.
Take care.
Okay.
Thank you. Hey, guys.